What is going on, YouTube? And what is going on, all of those catching us via podcast? Thank you so much for joining us right here on Split Screen D&D, the show where we're attacking all things D&D from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth.
Excellent, excellent. And I think you bring us in on this one because
well, we're starting a series. We've talked about social, and so I think a next interesting one that is especially interesting in the D&D sphere. I guess you see it more in video games, but usually sometimes it feels more like side quests and fetch quests, which is where D&D can really make it interesting. But the pillar of exploration.
Exploration. I love exploration. Well, maybe I should rephrase that. I don't know that I actually think of all of the pillars, I neglect exploration more than I should.
Well, and I'm okay with that because it also is my least favorite of the pillars.
I think let's start by summarizing that pillar a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's always good to define.
And I would say the best thing about the exploration pillar is I think it is the most flexible, the most agile pillar of the three, in the sense that exploration can pivot into literally any aspect of the game. They turn over, literally they turn over a rock, and who knows, maybe like an entire civilization of tiny ant-sized people, and combat ensues. Roll initiative.
Fireball.
Yeah, well, probably won't last long, but just like that, a combat encounter is sprung on.
Right.
They meet someone during their explorations, just like that. We're into kind of dancing with the social pillar. And whereas you can interject those other things, you can't pivot entirely, or I should say, you can more easily pivot entirely from exploration into any number of facets. And that's that flexibility is its strength, because I think what makes exploration great is that your party, or at least your party should understand that anything can happen in the next second. Anything can happen. Like, whereas you're sitting in a tavern, that's not to say, certainly, the roof gets blown off a tavern, now you're in combat. Anything can happen coming out of, but in terms of, it's not a through line of the social pillar that something's going to happen any minute. And that's really what lends the weight to exploration, is that knowing that around every corner, something, and I'm going to emphasize, should be there to discover.
Right. Well, and as a player, that is definitely true for exploration. And I guess it might be even nice to somewhat put in context what is exploration. Exploration isn't just limited to exploring a dungeon. It's sneaking into a house for thieving. It's trying to disarm a trap. It encapsulates.
It could be
all
overland travel.
Oh yeah.
I would generally say exploration. You're thoroughly in the domain of exploration when the players are looking for something and they do not know where it is.
Okay.
You are effectively, there may be a broader criteria to that, but let's say the difference between let's say we're just running a overland travel. You're going from town A to town B. There's a road that connects them. You're traveling. Now, I may have opportunity to inject some flavor into that travel through encounters, social interactions, what have you, but you're not really exploring to get there. You're traveling. As opposed to, there's some old ruins up in the mountains somewhere. Go find them.
Yeah, right.
Now we're thoroughly in the domain of exploration. A good example from our campaign would be Old Peltark. As you guys entered Old Peltark, which was a proper hex grid crawl through, and you guys were ultimately looking for the bandit camp, you found much more.
Yeah,
and
we did well.
Yeah. The first point that I would really want to hammer home, if you are introducing exploration, especially something as, like, I think the core exploration experience for Dungeons and Dragons, maybe less so now, but for let's call it older school D&D, is the hex grid crawl, where you're there's a representation of the progress you're making across the broader game world.
What's that game you play? Might and Magic?
Oh, here's my magic.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah, I would say as you're kind of moving through these spaces, the point I would really hammer home is if there's only one thing for your players to find, i.e., we'll use Old Peltark as an example.
Sure.
Old Peltark, this old growth forest you guys have entered in, you are trying to fulfill a contract on some bandits who have been doing some naughty things in the region.
Those naughty darn
Naughty
bandits. We took them over. It's fine. We're good.
Yeah. You guys are actually like buddies now. Like you didn't mind that they were evil.
Actually,
people.
I haven't heard. We tried to.
I know you haven't heard yet. Haven't heard yet.
All right, anyway.
But so you guys roll into this space. If I've created a hex grid of this world, and one of those hexes represents the bandit camp, and I go, all right, go. If there's nothing else to find in that space,
I will never explore again.
yeah, and this gets back to, we've talked about this in other episodes, rewarding your players for engaging with the world. And if we happen to be in the exploration pillar, be prepared to reward them for exploring. Because the whole point of exploring is not to beeline from point A to point B. It's to check those nooks and crannies. It's to maybe we got a rudimentarily drawn map, and there's this weird marking way over here where we don't have any reason to believe it's the bandit camp, but maybe we should check that out anyways.
Right.
So as a DM, the first thing that I would say is do not allow your players to explore barren regions. Now, there's one major caveat to that.
Like a desert survival type thing?
Yes. I would say if your players are lost and the intention is that you have some interesting encounter, whether they're in a labyrinth, in a whiteout, in
remembering our labyrinth.
a whiteout in the frozen north, or a sandstorm, amidst a sandstorm in Kalimshan. There are some fun things you can do with a barren space where the idea is more to drive the necessity of utilizing your skills to survive the situation. And in some regards, I do think it falls into the exploration pillar, but it's kind of almost this exploration adjacent thing, because it's
using the exploration skills.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually a really good pivot into another aspect. And as a player, you can talk with me a little bit about something I really like when I'm thinking about exploration is how can I ask of my players, like, oh, I haven't seen you do many, pick a role that you just haven't used, one of your skills you haven't used that often. And I love thinking about what skills my players have that don't get to shine, much in the same way I would try to make space for different players to shine, thinking about like, what can I create in the world that allows within a given player skills that they don't often bring out?
That's
shine. So talk with me a little bit about using those underappreciated abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will be totally honest here. Exploration is my least. Not that I don't enjoy it. I do. It's just not my most natural. It's the one that I probably struggle with the most. Which is interesting because I think my next character, that is going to be where he leans the most. So it's going to be very challenging. But anyway, so being that as it is, when I think about how to utilize, like, when I'm presented with a challenge, one, I'm very fortunate that I'm with a wizard, and so they usually take, but I try to think of what skills I usually don't get to use, I get to use. I think the ones I've used the most is carpentry.
Yeah, I absolutely. The exploration that I think about, I always think about
trying to build the bridge,
utilization of carpentry.
Yeah.
And it's a great example of, realistically, maintaining your wagon, your cart, a great way to use it. But generally, that's probably because it's endured some wear and tear during either overland travel or exploration. So those would be the places where it's probably most pivotal that you have.
And
that
I think
skill.
a lot of the tools, one thing I really don't enjoy about the D&D 5e base rules is they really don't delve into the tools. I think tools are freaking awesome.
Yep.
And they just really don't give you, I know there's a lot of supplementary material that can really flesh that out. But as a DM, if you're able to give the player ways to really bring out those tools, that's really fun.
Yeah, and I think I think that exploration as a pillar offers us as DMs opportunities because it's so flexible, and you know that you can kind of pivot in these weird ways. You also know that it's unique in that it really does demand whether that's exploring a kind of the classic dungeon crawl exploration. I would say old school dungeon crawls really were kind of the blending of the best of combat and the best of exploration into a single enterprise, because you're having to manage rations, manage your torches, manage, you're talking about,
we're talking old school team.
Yeah. I mean, you're managing, you're managing what I would say are exploration resources.
Right.
But you're also getting whittled down by combatant after combatant and kind of working your way through.
Attrition. Yeah. So
yeah,
attrition.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great example of kind of how those two marry. But what I really loved about what you were saying about skills and finding opportunities to use skills is your players, if you're not taking a concerted effort to generate experiences and encounters for your players to use certain skills, there are skills that players could have that they never roll in an entire campaign.
Never use.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so be cognizant of what skills your players have. And just like in combat, I think as DMs, it's really easy for us to go, oh man, he's got this ability, she's got that ability. Oh, wouldn't it be cool? Like, imagine if they were able to pull this off. What if we can think about kind of cool ways that those players are really going to elevate to hero-dom.
Right.
There's a great opportunity to do the same. Imagine when the Ranger, who quite frankly is underpowered in virtually every way.
They're getting better. They've gotten better.
No, they've done some things to improve it. But the thing is, and I actually think that to some extent,
actually, they're the best exploration class by far.
I think that they are one of the, and I think it's actually the what we'll call the failings of the Ranger may more appropriately be that the tone and tenor of modern D&D hasn't embraced exploration.
So we're
so
much focused on social and combat that we've kind of.
I think there are many, and again, this is I will say for myself, of all of the pillars, I've neglected certain forms of exploration. I've caught myself neglecting them, not giving them the proper attention that they need.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one aspect to consider with regard to building those spaces is. Find the skills your players are good at under those conditions,
right,
and allow them to shine. I mean, imagine a character who, through their survival, they're the only one who's going to be able to make that roll to find water in the desert.
Right.
What a heroic moment it is for them
to save the whole party.
When the party is literally, I mean, what a terrible way to TPK, but the party's literally going to die of dehydration. But it is a moment that is as imperative to the continuation of their story as any critical hit on a monster.
Yeah,
we don't
point.
always give it the same attention.
So so thinking about that, when a DM gives some exploration to you or gives you a scenario, as a player character, I think a good place is to start with your strengths. How would my character I have a dehydration, like, oh shoot, we got to find water. I'm only trained in carpentry. How could I use my carpentry skills to help us find water? I can't think of something off the top of my head, but think of something that you could do that plays into your strengths, and then or even better, how could you support your teammate who might have a better way to do it?
Yeah, I love it. There's awesome opportunity for cooperative play, and I like that notion of I do like the notion of starting with your strengths, because you know what you know.
Right.
This is in real life. You encounter a problem in real life, and you want to try to solve it with the tools you have, not the tools you don't.
Yeah. So if you need to build a chicken coop, if you have carpentry skills and this happened in game, then you'll be the one to build that chicken coop. You wouldn't have, but if you need someone to disassemble a life-threatening trap, maybe an invincible hat is in fact the way to go.
So there's solutions to different problems. It's Well, doubly so. You were building a bridge the entire time.
Oh
that
yeah,
they were-
I was trying my best, but no, they just disarmed the whole thing.
They instructed you to build the bridge. That's one of my favorite aspects. Is you showed up with the bridge. You spent all day building, and they were like, "Oh no, we actually disabled that trap a long time ago and didn't bother to tell you."
I know my muscles were rippling hard in the sun.
Yep. It quite literally. Also, this is actually not a bad segue because that moment always makes me think about Pour Some Sugar on Me, which is on the official Rakish Rovers playlist. You guys should check that out.
Oh, nice. And
They're able to check that out through our Patreon.
give us money.
But no, the playlist actually will be made completely public. But there is a companion
I see.
guide
that explains why the
which
songs.
actually does a pretty good job of explaining loosely what's transpired in the first 10 levels of the
Which I
campaign.
think is pretty cool. Like if you're enjoying the Rover campaign, you want to know the whole backstory. Why not learn through songs? I mean, that's a great
it's kind of an unorthodox way of doing it, but
it's
everyone knows it's an unbelievable amount of information to try and convey.
10 levels of D&D, go.
So if you guys are interested in that, absolutely jump on over to our Patreon and check that out.
And don't forget to click the like button and subscribe, get notifications. What else? Comments.
Oh, you got a comment. We're going to give some criteria. I mean, we love any comments, but at the end of every episode, we like to hear your thoughts on what's been going on in this conversation. If you are podcasting, listening in the car right about now, or you're at work pretending to get things done, yeah, good on you. Not for being at work, but for listening to our show instead of getting actual work done. We appreciate you. And I know you can't reach out and just touch a invisible button out in front of you.
I'll just.
That counts. That counts. He's touching me right now. I guess we're addressing people who can't see what.
Probably inappropriately, maybe appropriately. I don't know.
It was fully appropriate. It's Tuesday. Something I really like that you touched on there.
Yeah.
When you were talking about you like that you're traveling with a rogue and a wizard.
Yes.
And the fact that you touched on wizard. This is a big one that goes out to wizards everywhere. You have immeasurable power, and I know that this gets harped on a lot. There's a lot of memes out there about the exponential power curve of wizards. And those memes are generally acknowledging your combat prowess.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much on the spell list that can make you a rock star when you are existing inside the exploration pillar.
I think that's where wizard shines the most.
Certainly there's a number of classes I think that bring a ton of utility, but don't forget about that as a wizard, that you have tons of skills at your disposal that really are tailor-made for that environment.
Right.
And this goes for all classes. Don't shut yourself off to abilities and skills that you have that don't seem to immediately fit the situation. Think creatively about how you can use what you are good at to solve problems.
Yeah, I'm going to go bounce off that real quick because I actually have, so I'm a half-caster, but I do have 2 different spell books. I don't know what else to call them, prayer books. But I have my combat spells, where it's like, oh, I know I'm going to be fighting today. These are the spells I'm going to have. And there's my social or exploration or those different things, so that way
I'm utility set of
so in that way I'm able to very quickly transition between. That way it saves a lot of time, and because I think you really hit it. Like when you look at the wizard spell look, sometimes grease, we just ran into this, grease might not seem like a great spell. You make things slippery. We ran into a situation where that bought us some serious time, and it really helped us out.
Yep.
So I mean,
and I would to some extent, chase sequences are an interesting bag because they have a similarity to combat.
It's like combat exploration combined almost.
Yeah, I think maybe they've got more. The bigger of their 2 feet is in the combat camp, but it's another great example of a place in which a lot of utility can be expressed in the abilities that you have, and I think exploration and chase sequences share a lot of, they kind of hold hands on. It's a place where if your players are used to running combat, they're used to running social, bringing them into a very exploration heavy space, it's going to challenge them to think about their skill sets differently. And that's what we want to do. That's what the goal always is challenge our players in interesting ways. And there no better place to say, hey, you're intimately familiar with what you do well.
Right.
How can that help you when you're starving and lost in the forest? How can that help you when you're freezing cold and you don't know which way is which because it's been a whiteout for 3 days?
Right.
You know, those are great examples of again how just simple skills that sadly can be overlooked sometimes can come to the forefront and shine and make characters heroic for entirely different reasons than they
Yes.
might be in either of the other pillars.
Because I would say Katarina in a lot of ways. This is one of the areas. It's social, 100%, but sometimes she's really creative in how she addresses problems.
Absolutely.
So that's one way she really shines in this pillar. And I was just thinking, as a player, I'm almost curious. How many times have you set us up with a situation, and we totally subverted your expectations?
All of them. All of them. It's no, I mean, I and the thing is that it should. I mean, it should be. Obviously, it's not all of them. Sometimes I every now and then, even if you suck at darts, eventually you're going to hit the bullseye. No, I think you do your best as a DM, and I've touched on some of this in the DM and the PM, the Building Blocks of a Campaign series. Check it out. Plugged. No.
Did you like, comment, and subscribe yet?
No, but is understanding the motivations of your players gives you a much better sense of how they might react given a certain scenario. Still, I think at best that should be about a 50-50. I mean, I think like because things are going to start getting very linear if you can call exactly what your players are doing.
Yeah.
And
it'd be boring as a player because you're obviously spoon feeding us.
Well, I mean, it's way more exciting to find ourselves in a place where neither of us knows what the fuck is going on. And,
Right.
Again, we've talked about I love the term. I'm going to coin the term. I'm going to continue to run with the term, like a DM flow state. And I think players get to kind of exist in this place all the time because they're in that reactionary space.
Yes.
DMs, if you've done your session prep, you should at least be starting the session, even if it only lasts for a matter of seconds, starting the session completely on your toe. You're just ready. You're completely ready for anything. Rapidly your players should dismantle that and put you in places where, and there's times where that can manifest in maybe ways that you'd rather it hadn't. But when it's not, and more often than not, it lands in places that are compelling and exciting. That is a space where it is the best experience as far as I'm concerned that you can have as a DM. And exploration is a great pillar by which that can happen because just as I said, you can pivot to anything. That maps very literally into the game world. If they are standing in this square or this hex, they can go any direction they want. And who knows what they're going to find. And that would kind of lead to my second point from a DM standpoint is ensure that what you have instantiated throughout this map has substantial contrast. Don't make it that there's 40 combat encounters if they land in the wrong places. No social, no puzzles, no traps. No, it's just, oh, you fight some more wolves. Oh, you fight some giant rats. Oh, you fight some, make sure that, again, by the third combat, your player's going, okay, this place is littered with enemies. Certainly they're thinking that they need to be careful, but it keeps them a lot more on their toes if they come around the next corner and totally unexpected. There's an old man sitting cross-legged meditating in front of his fire.
Yes.
That's a totally, you are completely flipping the script. And nowhere else can you do that to the same extent as when players are in exploration mode.
I'm always, when you're mentioning that, I don't know if you ever played the original Fallout 1 or 2, but you'd be exploring and all of a sudden you just come across random shit. that you might find something, you might not, you don't know what it means. And it'd be kind of interesting as a DM to be like, you come across a empty camp where really there's nothing there, just to see what they do with it.
Absolutely.
That'd be interesting.
I would say, in the spirit of introducing contrast, don't have every interaction be a meaningful one.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, and that's not to say that meaningful in the sense of it doesn't have some weight or some, but if every person they meet is another breadcrumb in the trail that they're following, that begins to feel, it doesn't begin to feel like a living space. And exploration really is an opportunity to say to your party, or I should say show to your party, that the worlds that they're exploring have been lived in long before they arrived and will continue to be lived in long after they leave.
And that's one huge thing about exploration that I really enjoy, is it really makes a world feel like a world. You know, it's like, yeah, like you're saying, hey, you come across a trap that was set by who knows who, and there's a treasure here that's been here for thousands of years. It really fleshes out the world to realize that this is a moment in time, that this world existed before you were here and it will exist after you're here.
Yeah. And that is, without the exploration aspect, that's more difficult to do. It's certainly not impossible. You could through social, but it goes back to kind of the principle of show, don't tell. I could have, right before you set off into the woods, you know, an old, oh, well, you don't want to go to those woods because there's ghosts walking around and there's, you know, whatever. I could give you the entire synopsis of what this place is.
Well, think about great movies. If you give all your plot points through exposition, that's horrible. But if you do it through plot device, if you do it through scenery, if you do it through all this, then it becomes so much better.
Yes. And I think that in many regards, conveying information through exploration is a nod to the intelligence of your players, much as in a film or a book or a game, providing information about the world just by allowing them to experience it is a nod to the audience's intelligence and ability to connect the breadcrumbs. It made me think of, because it's a great example. I'm sure that there are some others since, but it's an example that probably a lot of people will be able to catch. If not, then sorry, spare me the 15 seconds. Actually, they've done it really well in pretty much everything they've done. But the Half-Life franchise, I'm specifically thinking of Half-Life 2. The intro sequence as you step off of the subway and you're kind of in this Combine-controlled police state. Nothing is said to you at all. I mean,
but you get to learn what the world is like immediately.
Yeah, and you literally you immediately know exactly where you are with nothing being said. And it's a really, actually, that intro sequence is a homage to what exploration should be. Now, I know in D&D we think about exploration as being these vast wildernesses or unknown dungeon spaces. Exploration can be walking through a city, and it's such a corrupt place that you almost feel like you're alone because you don't want to talk to anybody.
Right.
And it could also be a very friendly city. I mean, whatever you want to convey, but it's a perfect example of the way in which the world they are moving through has its own story to tell, not just the characters. And in some regard, that's one of the ways in which I would say, it's a pretty abstract way, but in which social and exploration can kind of map over each other, is you can tell stories, no NPC involved, through the elements that people are finding. And I would say, just as each pillar kind of scratches the other's back, lends weight and vibrance to the other pillars, this is a space where if you're walking through the forest and you go, okay, I guess we go here. And I go, great. You see a bunch of trees, there's some rocks, nothing of interest. You go, okay, I guess we go here.
Yeah.
More trees, rocks, nothing of interest. But if instead in those spaces you're finding old monoliths, carvings of some kind of strange creature, that as the exploration unfolds, you come to find like, oh shit, like
that's
people used to live here. People used to worship this thing. People used to,
and it's probably still here.
Yeah, and now, whether it has anything to do with the reason you were here, you might be here for totally different reasons.
Right.
But we're beginning to create lore and And effectively, it doesn't map to social well.
Yeah.
But it truly is the essence of exploration, but it's the difference between good exploration and bad exploration. And I think one way of thinking about it is saying, if you had an NPC there, you don't want it because they're exploring right now. You don't want exposition, but if you had one, what might they convey to the party about this? And then figure out a different way of conveying that. Don't convey it through exposition, convey it through the world.
And I agree with you that exposition should be used sparingly, but I just saw that new Dune movie, which was freaking fantastic. And they were able to tell through just the landscapes, to the excellent acting, the world, but these still had exposition.
Yeah, well, that is not to say that there isn't room for that. It falls clearly in the social pillar.
Like, I don't know, if you get to, like, if you're into a place where you need, don't be afraid to. You can't go like, oh, you find a book and then that, like, why not have an NPC that can explain everything and they can talk to and have that relationship with?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a breadth of experiences within an explored space is what makes it feel exciting and vibrant. But I would further that by saying, allow those experiences to enhance a broader lore for that space, or the lore revolving around the reason that they're there. One of the two, because they're there looking for presumably clues if they're trying to find something in this space.
Treasure. Everything's about treasure.
Treasure. Well, and let's actually, I mean, it's a hard segment or hard segue.
Yeah, sorry.
I think it bleeds in well with the idea of finding interesting things in spaces. For players, something that tends to interest them are the rewards of exploration.
Yeah. So whenever I run into whenever I can tell Tom is running into exploration, my immediate thought is there is a pot of gold at the end. What that pot of gold might be.
Can I interject something that I think is really important?
Yeah.
There is a pot of gold in some indiscriminate location. The end, I think, is a bit of a misnomer because.
Okay.
But. Yes,
yeah,
I catch your point that there should be some reward for
usually, and I understand that there might be, like, for contrast, not everything has to have in fact, it shouldn't have a reward, and the rewards can be different. Maybe the reward is, hey, there's a monolith to an ancient creature here, and you explored and you figured out that creature is now vulnerable to fire. I mean, that's kind of that's a reward in itself. But yeah, the main reason why exploration is interesting to me is as a player is the rewards.
Right.
That when I know that we're starting to roll some dice and exploring some things, I know something's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and I think that as a DM, knowing what incentivizes your players. And here's a good, because I know you're a completionist with regard to your games.
Yes. Well, and I don't hold a candle to Aster, to Ariel. She is a very much a completionist.
Well, I'm talking about like in video games, like outside of the D&D sphere.
Yeah, she is. Oh, my God, she's her. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. You learn something new every day. I didn't realize that you're living in her shadow in more ways than one. I mean, I realized a bunch of other ways, but no. But so what I think is cool is, as a DM, you want to reward your players for exploring. And oftentimes that means that there are arbitrary paths that can be taken that lead to nothing but that reward. Like, maybe let's keep with the old Peltark example, and let's keep with the reason you guys went to old Peltark was to hunt these bandits.
Right.
You had gotten the notion that they were in the northeastern segment of old Peltark.
Okay.
And you began kind of heading that way. Early on, though, you met a prospector and offered him copious amounts of alcohol. And once he was drunk enough, you were able to coax out the location of this mining claim that he had kind of staked. He was a little bit crazy. It was kind of hard to exactly pinpoint things, but you kind of had another ping on your map, let's say.
Yeah.
Completely separate from the actual reason that you were there. Now, you guys could well have done your mission and come right back. The antithesis of exploration. Go, do our job, leave.
Yeah. Side quest. That's what this is. It's a side quest. And I fucking love side quests.
Yeah. And I might either, I'm not sure if I step back a concentric circle or push in one further.
Okay.
I do think that there are side quests that can live outside of that exploration space.
Okay.
So, like, like I do think that maybe it's presented itself as, hey, we can also go check this out. Which, yes, it's definitely side quest territory. But ultimately, the idea is if I put something else in that world that's like, hey, I know you're here for this reason, but maybe explore around. If you explore around and you get nothing for your effort, you will not do that again. You will not. And so it speaks to the reward system that and now
Pavlov, that's what it is.
Let's say that you are not motivated by those types of rewards, then obviously I need to figure out a reward system that works. But whatever works for your players, this is speaking to those DMs out there, don't allow them to engage in exploration. If you're laying out a space for them to explore and they sweep the floor, they go every square of that grid, they're checking everything. Well, they're only going to do that so many times without any kind of reward for their effort.
Which could be like a, hey guys, you don't need to sweep the floor. I will let you know when things are here. You would not want to use the word punish, but you wouldn't reward that behavior.
No doubt.
So yeah.
And I'm thinking more in like the hex crawl exploration space rather than like we're in this room of the dungeon into the next room. And that's where I think, the let's call it sweeping the floor really comes down to like your perceptions and investigations of those spaces. But when you've created, let's say, alternate threads for your players to pull. And so this is not just, hey, there's a giant open space. What do you want to do? Well, we want to explore every single square.
Right.
Maybe there's a giant open space and you know that this is here and you know that this is here and you know that this is here. Well, if they go and check those things out, give them a reason for having done it. Don't go, well, you got there and it was a goblin camp and you killed all of them. Turns out these are the poorest goblins in the world. There's literally nothing here of interest to you.
Can we take their weapons? Yeah, they're mostly bit and damaged. But
you can't even take them. They melted in the fight, even though you used no fire. And all their gear burned in the fire that didn't exist. So be thinking about that, and this will echo some of the conversation from DM and the PM. Scale the incentives that you're placing in your world with the effort that your players are going to put in to acquire those. And so you guys, it was substantial effort when you guys found the entrance to this old tomb in Old Peltark. How would it have felt if your reward was 100 gold pieces after all that?
Oh my gosh, I'd have
would it be
explore again?
Would it be reasonable? For context's sake, the vault that they finally opened, having completed puzzles, explored to find all of the rings necessary.
We fought a pit lord light,
an aspect, I guess you could say, a planar aspect of a pit lord. You fought a hydra. You fought the Gith, who actually they were unexpected.
Yeah, they were
showed
unexpected.
Up. You fought
what's those hook horrors things?
Oh, the hook horrors.
Which I mopped the floor with them.
But I mean, it was a bunch of pretty gnarly battles, some great puzzle solving, some great exploration.
For 100 gold.
Awesome traps. I mean, imagine if that, but for the context for everyone, once you had opened that vault, you had acquired the 3 rings necessary, you had opened the vault, you were rewarded with, and I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the ballpark of 50,000.
I don't even remember.
It was an unbelievable sum.
Because I got the Ring of Strength.
You greedy bastards went back for the ring, and ultimately ended up escaping, though you came damn close to getting trapped in there.
Oh, thank God. What's that? The Shadow Step? I forget what it's called right now.
Misty Step.
Misty Step.
Yeah. And that saved your ass. But it's a good example of when you are implementing exploration into the world and when you're experiencing exploration, think about that as players. This really does fall on the shoulders of DMs, because players can only do what they can do. If they explore a space and they're not rewarded for it, how many more times are they going to do that with no reciprocity?
Well, let me ask here a little bit more of a. This is me peeking behind the screen question.
Okay.
So let's say we're exploring
behind that screen.
Oh, I'll take a good old peek. Let's say
it's just me. I'm wearing no pants.
Yes. It's Tuesday.
I know that's what you were after.
So we're exploring a room, and I roll a investigation check to see if there's anything there, and I roll a low roll.
Okay.
I, as a player character, know I rolled a low roll. Would my character know I rolled a low roll?
in general, and this is a particularly interesting, like when you make an attack, for instance,
Yes.
I think you have a pretty good idea of when you like, let's equate it to hitting a baseball. You hit a baseball and you catch the sweet spot, you know you cracked that sucker.
Yeah.
But you catch the wrong part of the bat and you feel a zinger all the way up to your elbows.
I fucking hate that. Yeah.
You know, so you know on an attack, that's a good correlation, I would say. You know when something struck good, you know when it didn't. With investigation and perception, to some extent, I think it kind of blurs the lines between player and character knowledge.
Yeah.
But I also think that, there's all sorts of, let's say you're exploring a dungeon. A dungeon is a terrible place,
Yes.
It's pitch black. There's monsters around every potential corner.
Right.
You maybe haven't slept in, some substantial period of time. You
If you
probably
are-
slogged to get
Yeah.
here.
And if you even are sleeping, it's like horrible sleep.
Yeah. So, I mean, the existence in a dungeon is terrible. So you say, I would like to, I want to examine this room, see if there's anything that maybe we missed. I think it could be written off to the fact that you might go, I checked this room out, but like I can barely keep my eyes open.
Right.
I'm exhausted. So you might know that maybe you're not giving it the best that you would if you came off of 8 hours of sleep. And so that's kind of one way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Something I would add, and this goes into the exploration camp, and I would throw this out to DMs out there, is if your players have suggested that they are taking a specific action, let's say there's a painting on the wall.
Okay.
Okay. There's a painting, and we're not in a dungeon anymore. We'll say, actually, we are in a dungeon. We'll say it's kind of it's an odd room. You come in, just barren room. There's a painting on the wall of some lordly looking figure.
Gotcha.
And your players say, I want to explore the room. I want to check this
Right.
out. Cool. Maybe I ask them for an investigation check. If a player says, I want to look behind the painting,
Okay.
what world could they live in where they look behind that painting? I say, give me an investigation check. They roll a 1 and they somehow don't recognize there's a safe behind the painting. I would argue, and I would put this out to all DMs, consider that when your players are being explicit with their investigations and
Yeah.
perceptions, that may be enough. They may not need a check.
Yeah.
If they are telling you specifically,
Yes, I see what you're saying.
an investigation is a substitution for I'm not inspired to look at any one thing. And now you may just be, when you're just checking everything out,
Right.
very precise in how you go through that. And that's what a high investigation would represent.
Right.
But I would say even a character with low investigation who says, I'd like to look behind the painting. Well, unless there's some magic that's obscuring the fact that there's a safe behind the painting, they would look at it and they'd go, I mean, what am I going to do as a DM if you roll a 1?
Right.
You go, oh, there's actually a painting. Well, why'd you ask for the roll? So
Yeah.
it's a good, or I'm sorry, there's a safe behind the painting. So I think it's a really good example of eliminating unnecessary rolls, which helps a lot of things by way
I
of,
was about to say, God, we should have hit on that. And we talked about social. We should have hit on that. You don't need a roll for social. Very rarely.
Oh,
do you
yeah,
need a
yeah.
social roll.
and yeah, I think that carries for many pillars. Combat is obviously one of the ones where
It's very roll heavy.
yeah, where you're rolling a lot of dice, and that's again what differentiates it in a lot of ways.
So I love it.
But that would be a good example because I think too that and you mentioned this earlier when we were chatting, or I mean before we shut this, is kind of the nuance between investigation and
Oh, yeah.
perception,
Yeah.
and maybe even more importantly than that nuance is the nuance between when a character has provided you enough information that you no longer need a roll at all.
Yeah.
And I would say that is certainly in the purview of exploration. If you're walking through the forest and a character says, I want to climb the tallest tree that I can see
Okay.
and just, get the lay of the land.
Okay.
If I know that the bandit camp is a half a mile away, like maybe I need a low DC perception.
Yeah.
But if there's a plume of smoke coming from the bandit camp and now you're above the canopy,
So you really don't need to. Yeah.
and all I would be doing is punishing the fact that they were creative enough to think to climb to the top
Right.
of that tree.
But then you could just reward for better rolls. Like if you rolled a 16, be like, oh, you can see smoke coming up, and you see a couple of outposts, and you see
Yeah, maybe you can see a scout's tower, so
Right.
you know, hey, they're going to be there. Someone might be
because I
watching.
always
for our
like
approaching.
that dice rolls are meaningful.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And this transcends all the pillars, but we can get into it
Yeah.
here. Absolutely.
So like even if you do roll if you check behind a painting and it's a really low roll, it's a safe, but you don't really notice anything about the safe. If you roll a really high, oh, it's a safe. Oh yeah, okay, you've seen this model before. It's a very hard to pick lock, pick
Yeah.
safe, that
And
kind of
that's
thing.
certainly something that I would probably leverage a character's background off of too. Like Kel, for instance, no
He's
matter how high
super
you
safe.
rolled, you would go, oh, I recognize that there's a safe back here.
Right, I'd stab it with my spear.
Well, yeah, that was probably actually would be your
It
course of
would be
action.
my first thing.
Could be a mimic though, so maybe you should have blocked. Now you're fucked.
Well, or I just smite it. That's what I was going to do anyway.
Okay.
If you don't smite things as a paladin, are you really a paladin?
Put it in the comments, but everyone knows the answers.
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
I mean, but to that point, I think definitely there's opportunities in exploration to, especially when we're talking about those skills that that don't always get to come to the forefront. Be thinking about not just the skills per the numbers on their character sheet, but the skills that these players have experienced through their backstories
Ooh,
up
yeah.
to this point in the campaign.
Yep.
Is let's say that your character was a nomad in Kalimshan. Maybe they don't have presumably they'd have a decent survival skill,
Right.
but let's say specifically they're trying to find water.
Oh,
I might give them a greater benefit of the doubt than someone who grew up in the Southern Islands.
advantage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so these would be places where you can take the skill sets the players have, both those recognized by the stats and those recognized throughout the campaign, throughout their backstories. And again, it's an opportunity where all of a sudden they can think about that character that they conceptualized, that nomad from Kalimshan, and you've given that persona a reason to be the star of this scene because their life experiences ultimately lend to this situation really, really well.
Yeah,
So,
I totally agree. Because that also just makes your character more valid.
Yeah.
Which is always good.
let's pivot a little bit because I think we've talked to some extent about kind of the or certainly from my perspective, the kind of open world exploration that I think is one big pillar. But I really do think dungeons are their own form of exploration.
Okay.
And I will say that our campaign is not a dungeon crawl centric campaign.
Oh goodness, no.
That said, I actually, especially as of late, have been more and more intrigued by the notion of interjecting some more kind of classic elements.
Please
into,
do. I fucking love dungeon
yeah.
crawls. Oh.
But let's kind of talk a little bit about the ways in which exploration is expressing itself in that space, because I really actually think the dungeon crawl is first and foremost an explorative endeavor made much in the ways that we talked about the pillars holding hands.
Right.
That exploration is made more intense, given more weight, given more meaning by the fact that it is laden with combat encounters.
Right.
So let's kind of talk about if there are any notable differences from a player perspective and from a DM perspective
Yeah.
in that space. And those, like I said, they may not be the most forthcoming examples, but first and foremost, what I can think of is a dungeon crawl. Players have a certain expectation of, let's say, the frequency of combat. The old school murder dungeons of yore are like. That's a great place to kind of start. That's the extreme example.
Yeah.
But it really does push us immediately into, like, if you're having a hard time as a DM conceptualizing, like, man, I want to do something cool exploration wise, but I don't really know where to start. A dungeon's a great place to start
Oh,
because they are tailor-made for the exploration experience. Once you've entered, you're I mean, you can go back out, certainly, unless there's some reason you can't, but you're basically crossing that threshold. You're quite literally moving from whatever pillar you were existing in prior to, and the second you step in there, now you're in a space via the dungeon crawl dynamic where what you brought with you on your back is what you've got. The support that you've got with you is what you've got.
Yeah.
You really have severed that lifeline back to the surface. And I would say a good dungeon crawl reminds you of this at every opportunity.
Yes.
And that's maybe a broader consideration for all of exploration is remind your players that they're alone.
Yes.
That's a hallmark of good exploration is that there's not a 7-Eleven around the corner where, like, oh man, we're running low on stuff. We gotta, the weight of the exploration experience should build with every passing day or hour or as their supplies become less, as their resources to engage in combat dwindle.
Yeah, like the war of attrition. And I will say, as a player, stock up. There's I forget. Look up mundane items that are really useful in D&D, and buy those things. Chisels, buy chalk, buy mirrors, buy these things cost nothing, and yet if you can really use these in creative ways, I'm trying to think of some examples in game that we've used these things. But I know.
Well, I mean, all sorts of times. I mean, like I said, I mean, I don't think anyone needs to be convinced of how important climbing gear is.
Oh my
of how
God.
important.
Yeah, bring extra rope. If you think you got enough rope, bring extra rope.
There's been certainly some creative play with some barrels of oil that you guys purchased
We'll
along
always
the
buy
way.
barrels of oil. Just from a player standpoint, plan ahead. Now there's obviously a point where you can't, and you can't bring a month's worth of food. But yeah, I say preparation is so huge from a player standpoint because it also gives the DM so much to play off with too.
Well, and that's something I would say is as much as you should be thinking about how you can be creative with your abilities and skills in that environment. Even more can be said about what you can do creatively with your gear, especially when you've got carpentry skills, you've got herbalism skills, you've got there's any number of ways that you can that you can actuate what would be mundane gear into really creative solutions. I'm gonna hammer this. I don't know how many times. Reward that behavior, DMs. if you see them,
true.
dig through their bags and MacGyver something together that's interesting, now, unless a dice roll determines,
that's what I'm saying. It's not an immediate success.
No, but I mean, like, so let's say you go like, oh well, I've fashioned together this crazy apparatus that's gonna save us all. We're gonna make it through this, guys.
Right.
And then you go to use it and you roll a 1. Well, yeah, maybe the thing falls apart and it was not
right.
But I would just say, don't be of the mind that you've created this space to be explored in a specific way.
Thank you. Yes, that's the thing. Yeah. It's a playground.
Yeah. And I will, I'm going to pivot back to the dungeon then because of something you said. You were talking about,
yeah, please.
Acquiring that kit, acquiring that gear.
Yeah.
Now in more, let's say more overland based exploration, open world exploration, we are, less bound, especially like your group has some horses and you have your cart. But now as you depart that and push into one of these dungeon crawl environments, now all of a sudden you're constrained to what you can carry on your back, and every one of those pieces of gear could be rations, could be torches,
right?
Could be so that's where having those, I completely agree, where you can look through your stock there on your wagon, tie up your horses, hope they're not dead when you get back, and pick through what you've got and make the most of it. But that's something that I really love about adding that extra layer when you're talking about the dungeon crawl. But it's just a reinforcement of what makes exploration great in the first place is great. You're at town, deciding what might stand in my way as I'm going into the unknown, what could help me overcome obstacles and problems. That is then further distilled when you go, I can carry even less, I need even more. And that's really where kind of the dungeon crawl exploration environment really ratchets that up. And that's, again, I think that's really why there's such a kind of a line drawn in the sand between that old school style play and the new school, is that ratcheting of, you know, your last torch just burned out. It's pitch black in here. You are 8 hours travel from where you entered this thing.
Right. You're
What
dead
do you,
now.
what do you
Yeah.
do? You know, and like, but what an amazing opportunity to start thinking creatively. Great. All of a sudden, the wizard is the rock star because they can cast light, and they're,
Right.
you know, all of a sudden, and that's one very superficial example of, but when things go bad, just as we talked about in the failures episode,
Right.
failing to have enough supplies to carry out a mission
Right.
is ripe territory for people to begin being creative and becoming rock
Right.
stars at the table. In
And
other
give
ways.
the opportunity too. Like, don't just build a hey, oh, you didn't bring 3 weeks of ration, you only brought 2 weeks of rations. Well, now you're dead.
Yeah.
Like-
Well, I would say certainly there's, again, probably a feels bad TPK, but there is an amount of rations that you could take into a dungeon that is a death sentence.
Yeah.
There's also, you know, and that all, I think, tailors primarily by the type of experience, the type of game you're wanting to play at your table.
Yes, and there are the games that are like, hey, how much does those rations weigh? Because you know you have to take that into the dungeon. Like,
Yeah. I mean, and I think you'd have a hard time running a proper dungeon crawl without taking some of
yeah.
that into
I have
account.
a year's worth of rations in my backpack. Wait, that doesn't make sense.
Right. And so how lenient or strict you enforce those probably says something about what you're wanting out of the game.
Right.
But I mean, I think, you know, and there's exploration is a big topic because it can,
All the pillars
so
are.
many things can kind of exist under that umbrella.
Yep.
But I think, you know, for the DM sum up of the topic,
Yes.
the biggest thing let's say 2 points, but I may stumble into a third one, is one, if you're giving your players places to explore, let there be things to find.
Mhm.
Don't just give them we're not playing Minesweeper here. It's not, there are exciting things to find, and players should feel like around every corner, with every step they take, they could be stumbling into an amazing social encounter, a terrifying combat encounter. Oh shit, we tied some scraps of fabric onto trees, and there's one of our scraps of fabric. Like,
Right.
holy crap! Like, maybe we're not where we think we are.
Right.
You know, there's all sorts of ways that you can spice that up. So one, give them, and that kind of bleeds into the next, give them quantity in explorative spaces, and that doesn't have to be crazy encounters, but make those moves to that space meaningful, narratively or mechanically, and make them quality. And by quality, I mean contrast. If every single time they go, it's 8 more rats and we fight them, and then we push on. 8 more rats and we fight them, we push on. Keep them guessing, because it's really the nature of exploration is what's next, what's around the corner.
Absolutely.
And the second that you've given them a motif of like, oh, this is one of those dungeons where there's 8 rats every room, and then there's 8 more rats.
Yay, D&D.
And I think to a greater or lesser extent as DMs, we do our best to avoid that. But being cognizant of how you can spice up explorative spaces using quantity of experience and contrast of experience, I think can rapidly start taking players who don't get that much out of that pillar and move them into a camp where they're going like, oh, actually, I love combat, and that was cool, man. We had some really interesting combat encounters in that space, or reward that social player at your table by introducing it. It could seem out of place even. All the more reason to lean into like, what the heck is this? Like this weird jester guy doing in the middle of the woods out here nowhere. Like,
Right.
presumably he's more than just a jester at that point, and play with that. There's realize that just because you want to integrate different types of encounters into a space, if they don't always fit, lean into the fact that something's not right here, and there's some fun things that you can do in that space as well. So hit me with the player rundown for exploration.
So for exploration, I feel from the player standpoint is know who your character is. So you know what your character can do. So when you're presented with an obstacle, you know what your character can do to help aid in that obstacle. Maybe in that case, it's that your character can't do a lot. And that's fine. Can you support your other fellow players to make them shine and also make everything better? So that's what I would first do when you're faced with exploration problems. Also with exploration, as a player, not that it's expected, but look for rewards. I don't want to speak for how all DMs are, but if Tom is giving me an exploration thing, I know something's like most of the time. Either I'm gonna, even worst comes to worst, I'm gonna learn a little bit more about the world, but never be afraid to explore that world. I think that's just so huge.
Yep.
And I know I had a last point I want to hit on. I can't remember what it was.
It's out there. It's just around the next corner.
Oh well. Yeah.
Sometimes you are
sometimes you're
rolling nat 20s, sometimes you're rolling nat 1s. And in this case, that point was just beyond your reach as we fumbled our way through the forest of exploration. I think that pretty much does it for us here. If you guys got anything out of this conversation, we would hugely appreciate it. And quite frankly, we would love the like and the sub. We would really love the comment. We would love to hear what you're liking about the content, what you're not liking about the content, what you think about exploration. Talk with us about the cool things you're doing in exploration spaces. Talk with us about the ways that you are challenging your players to use abilities that don't always get to shine. Give us your thoughts on that. And did you have something to
Absolutely. I figured out what I was going to say. I came back. So I rolled a 1 first, and then I got another chance, and I rolled 15 or something. So as a player, prepare for exploration. It's ridiculously how cheap some of the most amazing tools in D&D are in the game. A pickaxe, a chisel, a block and pulley system. Like there's a rope. Buy more rope than you ever think you'll need. Don't prepare for those.
As a DM, I recommend going no rope. If you're a badass, no rope. No rope, no weapons, no armor. I challenge you. Tell me how it works out.
Barbarian's the only class I can
you
play.
Also can't play barbarian.
But yeah, okay, I remembered. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I do think that pretty much sums it up. As always, we thank you for joining us here
Thank you so much.
Split Screen D&D. It means the world to us that you're tuning in for the content. And
all right.
That.
So, Tom, let's say you are a wandering salesman in the middle of a forest, a party who has obviously been lost in a long time, and hey, I got a chance to make an extra buck. How would you go?
Hey there, you fine folks. You look a little lost there. You know what could help out with that? I've got some brand new The World Is Yours right here. And can be yours for, takes a glance at the old coin purse. 20 gold pieces? A steal of just 20 gold pieces, and the world is yours.
Sold.